Kristen, you hit record?
I did, thank you.
Okay. Good evening. The hour being 7 o'clock on April 30th. This is the Appropriations Committee. I am the chair, Chris Sanella. And pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the City Council or Appropriations will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. We will post an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Melrose website and local cable access government channels. As always, public input matters before the City Council is welcome and can be submitted via email to the cityofcouncil@cityofmelrose.org. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Councilor Eccles.
Here.
Councilor Garifay.
Here.
President Gregoritis.
Here.
Councilor Jamaluddin.
Here.
Councilor McMaster.
Here.
Councilor McNaught.
Here.
Councilor Migliarelli.
Here.
Councilor Stewart. Councilor Thomas.
Here.
Councilor Trementosi.
Here.
Chairman Sanella.
Here.
10 present.
At this time, I would like to open the floor for public comment or entertain a motion.
Motion for public comment?
Second.
We have a motion for public comment by Councilor Trementosi, seconded by President Gregoritis. And if you are waiting in queue from the public and wish to speak, please hit the raise your hand button so we know you have. Is there anybody waiting in queue? I can't hear you, Kristen.
There is someone in queue. There are people in queue, but I don't, in the public attendee list, excuse me. I don't see anybody raising their hand that they would like to speak at this time.
Okay. Guess I'll entertain a motion to close public comment.
Motion to close public comment.
Second.
We have a motion to close public comment by Councilor Trementosi, seconded by Councilor Migliarelli. Like to call the roll, Madam Clerk?
Yep. Councilor Eccles.
Yes.
Councilor Garifay.
Yes.
President Gregoritis.
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin.
Yes.
Councilor McMaster.
Yes.
Councilor McNaught.
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli.
Yes.
Councilor Stewart.
Yes.
Councilor Thomas.
Yes.
Councilor Trementosi.
Yes.
Chairman Sanella.
Yes.
11, yes.
Yeah, first order of this evening is Order 2020-78, appropriation for the Special Education Stabilization Fund in the amount of $450,000 to the school department. At this time, I know we have some folks from the administration to speak on this, and I would entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
Motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
We have a motion to suspend the rules by Councilor Gregoritis, seconded by Councilor McNaught. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll.
Councilor Eccles.
Yes.
Councilor Garifay.
Yes.
President Gregoritis.
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin.
Yes.
Councilor McMaster.
Yes.
Councilor McNaught.
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli.
Yes.
Councilor Stewart.
Yes.
Councilor Thomas.
Yes.
Councilor Trementosi.
Yes.
Chairman Sanella.
Yes.
11, yes.
Okay. I'd like to bring on our, we have Superintendent Tamor with us, or?
We do. We have Superintendent Tamor. I'll make her a panelist now. We have Patrick Delarusso, the city auditor. I'm not sure why I'm not able to make him a panelist, but can you guys see Superintendent Tamor?
Yes.
Okay.
The floor is yours, Superintendent Tamor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. This is, for those of you who are not familiar with this, several years ago, many cities and towns moved to create a special education stabilization fund. We recognized at the time that districts could be severely impacted by unexpected special ed costs, and we needed some sort of stabilization fund. We have yet to access it, and I will explain why in a moment. At the time, and Mr. Della Russo began to fund it, and he's funded it a little bit more each year out of free cash. The purpose of this fund is sometimes when we have out-of-district placements unexpectedly, or what is called move-in.
You control all that.
I'm sorry.
You can mute your mics.
Okay, so we costs exceed what we had planned for. So very simply, let me give you some numbers. In FY19, we had 39 out-of-district placements. We work very hard to keep our children in district. We create our own programs, but there are children with significant needs that need special placements. So in FY19, we had 39. At the beginning of FY20, this current school year, we had 46. As of April 20th, we had 53. Obviously, these are things that while you could plan a little bit of a cushion, the way the school budget is planned, you cannot anticipate some of these costs. Some of these costs come about because, as I think you have heard me speak, we are seeing children with more needs on two fronts. We're seeing children with multiple handicaps, and we're seeing children with behavioral health challenges. In addition, we have had a number of unexpected move-ins. This is part of the price you pay for having a good school system when people want to come to us, have their children attend, but sometimes they also come with children who are already in out-of-district placements. If a child is already in a collaborative, we have to pick up that cost immediately. So collaboratives usually run anywhere from $55,000 to $80,000. Last year, we had 3 children move in. We picked up immediately. When children move in who are in private special ed schools, and private really is a misnomer, they're public schools, but they're run by nonprofit organizations. There is the move-in law. So if the child moves in before April 1st, we pick up the cost of the tuition the following year. If the child moves in after April 1st, we get a pass for that first year. The previous school district continues to pay, and we pick up the child the subsequent year. So in addition to 3 collaboratives that moved in last year, we had 2 very, very expensive out-of-district placements move in. Again, for confidentiality, I can't discuss the details of the placement or the children, but those 2 placements by themselves cost us approximately $526,000. Obviously, when you're planning a school budget, this is something you do not anticipate, and that is why cities and towns have gone to a stabilization fund. In order to pay for this, we froze in January, never expecting the situation we're currently in. So we have some savings. We had done a similar effort the year before, and we're able to absorb in FY19, we were able to absorb any upticks in special ed tuition because we had frozen our budget and had some savings. But obviously this year, under extraordinary situation, where we began the year at 46, we're now at 53. We are approximately $800,000 in deficit. We can cover about 350,000 of it. So we need to request the stabilization fund to pay these tuition bills in this current fiscal year. I'll gladly take questions, Mr. Sinella.
Counselor Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent Tamer, thank you for being here. of the current 53 or so students, are there any students in the special education program that will be coming out of our program this year, graduating out in 2020?
We don't have anyone graduate. Well, we have over 600 special ed students, Mr. Thomas. So we're talking about the 59 that are out of district.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. We have one child who's returning to us in the fall. We worked very hard to return that child. So we're looking forward to that. But, we try to return children when we can. That's why we build out programs. We returned 2 other children this winter. So that is a priority of ours.
Okay, so will that alleviate any of the deficit that we're facing right now?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We all know how awkward this is.
No, that's quite all right. So the 53 out of district or out of city, they're staying on our budget next year.
Yes, minus the one that's returning for the fall. So,
That's right. And quickly, I just want to thank you for your years of service to the Melrose school system and the Melrose community, and I wish you all the best in your retirement.
thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Madam Clerk, do we have anybody else from the administration you want to bring on?
We do. We have in the queue, we have Mr. Della Russo, the auditor. I'm unable to make him a panelist, but I can add his audio. And we have the treasurer, Art Flavin. I'm able to make him a panelist. So Art, I'm going to bring you in right now. And then Patrick, I've unmuted you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, I don't know why, for whatever reason, it's just not, the options are either mute or unmute, and it is not giving me a panelist option.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you all hear?
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Art, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Would you like me to
I
respond?
can hear
on
you.
the-
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes. Your video is not on, Art.
I think I just got a new laptop. I don't think it's working correctly.
Counselor McMaster, you're next for questions.
Yeah, they can hear me.
Thank you.
I'll respond.
Thank you, Mr. Some questions, and I'll throw them out there for whoever our guests think would be most appropriate to answer them. First question is, the superintendent talked a little bit about the history and the purpose of the Special Ed Stabilization Fund. What year did we establish that as a city?
This is Patrick. Can I respond to that, Kristen?
Everyone can hear you.
Yes, hi, Counselor.
Hello?
Yes, the Special Education Stabilization Fund was established in June of 2014. It was order number 2014-135, and it was for the sole purpose of providing for unanticipated special education costs and expenses. And that fund, I'm sorry, Counselor, in that fund, the first deposit was $300,000. That was also made in June of 2014, order number 2014-130. Again, that was for $300,000. That was the first deposit into the fund, Counselor.
Thank you for that. And if I understood the superintendent correctly, we have never transferred out of this fund since 2014.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
So there have, until now, there have never been any unanticipated costs, presumably.
May I answer? I would say that we were able to manage them within the budget.
And this might be most appropriate for the superintendent. If you could talk a little bit about the circuit breaker, especially for our newer council members, and just explain how that works relative to this issue.
Mhm.
Okay. Here's how circuit breaker works. Circuit breaker is a refund on extraordinary costs above a threshold of $48,000. So if you have a child at a placement for $60,000, circuit breaker is calculated on $12,000, the difference between the threshold and the cost of the placement. It varies in its percentage of reimbursement yearly, depending on the state's ability to do so. In my career, I've seen it as low as 42% and as high as 75%. We have been assured that even under these circumstances, the FY20 circuit breaker will be at 75%. But I will tell you in my experience that when the state is pressed for money, reducing circuit breaker percentage is one of the places they go.
How is that money received? Is it a lump sum? At what point in the year is it received?
It's usually paid quarterly. So there's usually sometimes a lag time between receiving the funds and what we're paying out for tuition. So sometimes when you look at our warrant, you may see some, a minus. Similar with the 240 grant, which is the federal grant that we receive every year for special ed.
And does that money go into a revolving account? And if so, where is that? Is that on the school side of the budget?
It's on the school side of the budget, and we use it to offset the next year. So a very simple example on these two very expensive placements we have, we're paying that totally out of pocket right now because they are too new to get circuit breaker on. We will receive circuit breaker on those placements probably sometime in the fall, and then that circuit breaker will offset those tuition costs next year.
The revolving fund right now, I understand the money for these two particular students we don't have right now, but what is the balance of the revolving fund now on the school side?
Nil, that's why we're here.
There's no money in the revolving?
I don't believe we have anything in circuit breaker. I think we've paid it all out. I'd have to check with my business manager, but I believe that's why we're having an $800,000 problem. Because circuit breaker is never sufficient to cover your tuition costs when you think about it. If I have $100,000 tuition, I'm only getting 75% of $52,000, so I'm getting about less than $40,000 against $100,000 tuition. It's not a one-to-one formula in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I think that the reason I asked that question, Superintendent, is my understanding and looking on the city side of revolving funds is that the purpose is to carry money over to be used from year to year. So that's why when you said that you believe there's nothing in there, I guess I just expected that there would be something in there from which we might be able to draw to offset these costs further.
We are drawing down the circuit breaker currently, Mr. McMasters, to pay the $800,000 deficit that we have. And again, so that the council understands, we are still paying out-of-district costs even in the closure. That is the decision that has been made at the state level. We are continuing to pay these costs through the end of the school year.
Thank you. And Superintendent, for the two particular students in question, and I understand we can't get into any specifics or any identifiers that would, would potentially tell the public who the students are. I recognize that and I'm sensitive to that, but I'm wondering, were we aware of these two students prior to April 1st? Were they, did we know of them? Did we anticipate those costs back at the start of the school year or before April 1st? I think you mentioned we're off the hook, so to speak, for April 1st enrollments in the district. That would result in.
We knew about them, but by the time we became aware of them, the budget process was well underway. I will also tell you that it is not our habit just to accept something like this, and we try to challenge it with DESE, and we did not win that challenge.
So we knew, but they weren't accounted for in the budget, you're saying. And at least, and when you say in the budget, I'm assuming that's in the line item for out of district.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And Superintendent, just so we understand, how do we arrive at the actual number? Is it, the number that, I know you're offsetting some of that with the money that was frozen after January 1st, but there's no, and I understand that certain things may not be able to be itemized, but we have a number in front of us, and you could help us understand how do we get to those numbers for those two students? Because as you can imagine, to the public, for two students, although maybe very necessary in the actual costs, almost $500,000, I think people would want to know, and it'd be helpful to understand what is within that that amount of money.
So I'm trying to be very careful here, Mr. McMasters, because I don't want to say anything that can identify these children. So let me talk in hypotheticals. Children with disabilities range from what we call from mild to severe. A child with mild disabilities, you probably know many of them. You may even have them in your own home. They're getting great services in our schools. We're doing the best we can to make sure that they're getting a standards-based education. We have some children who have more moderate disabilities that we create programs for, sub-separate programs that kids move in and out of. Melrose is an inclusion district. We make sure that our children are in the mainstream as much as possible, but sometimes students have to spend part of a day in a pull-out setting. We have children we cannot service for a variety of reasons having to do with their disabilities. Special education by design is a law of failure. Children do not go to out-of-district placements until the school system fails to meet their needs because their needs are beyond our capacity. They may go to a private placement like the collaboratives, which run us anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 to $80,000, seem collaborative, or they can go to a school like Landmark, which is pushing 6 figures to send a child to Landmark, or if a child is medically, cognitively involved to a degree where their quality of life is not anything I would want for anybody I know, they are in highly specialized placements. These placements can run anywhere from $200,000 to $350,000. And you could have a child in that placement, and on top of being in that placement with nursing care, intense ratios, they may on top of it need an aide 24/7, and we would pay for that aide 24/7 as well. That's the range that we have with children who are placed out of district.
Thank you, Superintendent. I just have one final question at this point, and then I'll yield to my colleagues. It's more on the timing of it, where we're 8 months now, or as of tomorrow, we'll be 8 months into a 9-month school year, and I'm just wondering, is there any urgency to passing this now? Why now? Is there any reason we wouldn't hold it for a little bit longer? If there were questions, understanding that we're hearing this, information tonight for the first time, should we want some more time to come up with questions and just vet this further, considering that it's a transfer out of a stabilization fund? And I guess in second to that, Superintendent, Mr. Della Russo, and however you want to answer these questions, whether the superintendent starts with that or Mr. Della Russo begins with this follow-up, is what's the balance of the stabilization fund right now, special ed stabilization fund, and what will that look like if this transfer is approved or recommended for approval tonight? Thank you. And that's all I have today.
Mr. McMasters, we have to pay our bills. We are on a fiscal school year. We are on a fiscal year, just like the city.
And Mr. McMahon,
You cannot pay into FY21 and FY20 bill. That's the first thing. And please understand, all of you, it's not these tuitions that set us over. It's a number of tuitions unexpectedly. I began the year at 46, I'm at 53. On top of it all, we've had tremendous trouble with transportation. When we have had to hire outside transportation on top of our own transportation, transportation companies charge us $250 a day. That's what they charge. So a combination of an increase in out-of-district placements, extraordinary transportation costs, have led to a situation where, like, as I started this by saying, last year we were able to handle internally additional special ed costs. This year, we cannot. So we are coming for a stabilization fund that we set up 6 years ago for this very purpose.
Mr. McMaster, it's Patrick Delarusso.
Yes, sir.
The current balance is $478,030.17. So if this order is approved, there will be $28,030.17 left for this fiscal year. We are intending to replenish this fund in an order coming down to the council next month.
Thank you both.
Counselor Tramatose?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Councilor McMaster asked a lot of questions that I had in my mind. And I do appreciate, Superintendent, all your service over these past number of years. And I wish you the best of luck in your retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Tramatose.
But I do have a couple of questions. It is a lot of money, and I understand that some of these out of district placements can be very expensive depending on the needs of the individual children. But is any of the service covered by health insurance, private health insurance, Medicare, or anything that could supplement our costs?
Mr. Tramatose, the truth of the matter is that when this law was passed in this state in 1972 and by the federal government in 1975, every insurance company in this country realized they could pass those costs on to a public body. And that's what has happened for well on to over 50 years. What is it, 50 years? However many years it is, okay? But since this law has been passed, that is what happens. We are responsible for children with disabilities from the ages of 3 to 22. All right. And believe me, the insurance companies know it and the medical field knows it.
So it'll take an act of Congress or our state legislature to change the law to, and what would you do?
You know what? I agree with you so wholeheartedly. It's difficult to explain. We have children, not me and Melrose, in education, in this field. We have children that never see a public school. All right. They spend their lives in a pediatric nursing home, then they go to an adult nursing home. And from the time they are 3 to the time they're 22, the bill shifts to us. Prior to being 3, the bill is paid by DPH, the Department of Public Health. When they turn 3, the bill immediately shifts to us. When they turn 22, it shifts to an adult service agency, maybe mental health, developmental disabilities, whatever it may be. But everybody knows from 3 to 22, it is our bill.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because it puts a significant and huge burden on the rest of the public school system. You mentioned about the circuit breaker. So is any of this funds reimbursable by the state? That the $450,000?
We submit circuit breaker next summer. Some of the costs attached to this will be reimbursed according to that formula that I shared.
Right.
A new wrinkle that we don't really have our hands around right now is special ed transportation, which is almost as costly sometimes as transportation. As I told you, we're now being charged $250 a day. So I want you to think about that for 180 days. Was not reimbursable. That always came out of the budget. Finally, under the Student Opportunity Act, as part of that new legislation, they are going to begin to reimburse special ed transportation, but they're going to phase it in. And again, they're going to set a threshold, and above that threshold, we'll get 25% reimbursement. Supposedly next year, it's supposed to go up to 50% reimbursement. But again, I wouldn't bet on anything in the current situation, as we all know.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Delarusso. If we were to get any circuit breaker money and reimbursement for this, would that go into the stabilization fund that this money is coming from?
No, it would not.
Where would it go?
it would stay on the school side to offset any current or anticipated costs for special ed. This is just one snapshot in time. That money will be applied again to those purposes to address the special ed needs. One of the things that we have, I want to just bring up on the floor is that when we set this up in 2014, Counselor, we had conversations about the growing, I'll just say, expenditure levels that we were seeing, the superintendent in particular, and myself, for special ed cost. And we felt that in order to assure that we're not going to interrupt the regular services during the year, should we get hit mid-year, typically after the budget is set, just like now, that we would have to have some mechanism to address that cost. That cost is as you know, it's a mandated cost, and that we have no option but to pay it. So we always have to be cognizant of the fact that we own this cost, and to prepare ourselves for the future, because this isn't going away, and the superintendent, I'm sure, could testify to that. That's one of these things that I think, unfortunately, we're going to be responsible for. As I think in the future, we're going to be more responsible for OSHA requirements and those mandates, which I think will be coming down the road again even more. It's an element of doing business in the public sector.
All right. So hypothetically speaking, Mr. Della Russo, if we did not approve the expenditure of these monies, what would be the ramifications? Would it be something that the state would come down on us?
I would
Well-
venture would say that the private out-of-district school will sue us.
Okay, right. Which ultimately could result in additional expenses and costs.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Councilor Stewart, did you raise your hand?
I did, but Councilor Trent-Matozzi addressed my question, so thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
President Gregoritis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Superintendent Tamor. As the parent of two Melrose Public School children, I want to thank you for your leadership during this unplanned foray into remote learning, and particularly for your words Tuesday night at the school committee meeting. I really took those to heart as a parent struggling to make sure my kids are doing okay. And I want to always thank you for how fiercely you defend the confidentiality of our children in any conversation. As someone who works with vulnerable populations, I really appreciate that. And I know these are numbers on a page, but these are children, these are members of our community, and I think all parents want what is best for their children. And I'm grateful that as a district, we work so hard to try to provide that, no matter how complicated the case. So with that, I'd like to make a motion for passage.
That would be a motion for recommendation to the full board.
Correct. A motion for recommendation.
Second.
A motion to recommend Order 2020-78 by President Gregoritis, seconded by Councilor Eccles. Madam Clerk, are you there?
Any further discussion? Just
Further discussion around this? I didn't see anybody else raising their hands. I do have Councilor McMaster for the second time, but is there anybody else for the first time? Okay, Councilor McMaster?
Just on discussion, based on what the superintendent has represented, I think, yeah, I would be inclined to support this, but I'm a little uncomfortable moving forward on this tonight. I understand there's already a motion on the table, so short of it being withdrawn and the second being withdrawn, I know we can't go here, but I just want to explain what my concern is that I had asked the superintendent about if there's a balance in the revolving fund, and understand her belief is that there isn't, but she'd have to check with the business manager. And my concern is that revolving fund exists for a purpose, and without knowing what the balance of that revolving fund is, and whether or not money from the revolving fund, which would include circuit breaker money from over the years, could be applied to offset some of these costs, I would be hesitant just to vote without knowing the answer to that. And I just think for, due diligence would require before we move forward on this is just to know what the balance of that revolving fund is. And then knowing that and having what I would expect would be a satisfactory answer, I'd be more comfortable voting. So I know I can't make a motion because we have a motion on the table, but I would like to see it just held in committee till we receive that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes.
So again, I know that many of you are new to this, and so let me just explain some of the way the school budget works. Melrose has never been able to fully fund our request, right? Even, and they will not be able to fully fund our request next year, as we all know, under the current circumstances. It's very disappointing, I'm sure we all feel that way. What the school district every year does is it brings offsets to the budget. Those offsets complete the funding of the school.
Superintendent Tamor, you've been muted. I think we've had some technical difficulties. Can you just hold one moment?
Let's take a quick second. Kristen, can you hear us?
Okay.
I can hear you. Cindy, can you hear us?
I can hear you now, Kristen. Thank you. So telling
Chris,
you
sorry,
that.
Chris, I think Counselor Jamaluddin also got kicked out of the system. Thank you. Sorry.
This is not the best way to do business.
Superintendent, you can finish, and here she is. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So we bring about $3.5 million as offsets to every budget cycle. Otherwise, we would not be able to fund the school system that you all know. Among those offsets is circuit breaker. So this is how this works. I know that I have X thousands of dollars in circuit breaker money coming to me based on what I paid out this year. I have calculated using that money as an offset against next year's budget. So it's not like there's some money sitting there. The money is rolled over to pay for next year's tuitions as well, next year's teachers, next year's busing costs. It's not sitting there in reserve. This is how the circuit breaker works. We roll it over to pay for the next year's costs. What I do to be careful is I always underestimate circuit breaker because I don't trust the state. But I certainly don't underestimate it to a degree that I have $500,000 sitting there. So any money that we may get in circuit breaker next year, we are going to need to fund next year's budget, along with the money we get from ed stations, building rentals, grants, and other sources of income.
Madam Clerk, just for clarification, because I know you fell off, we have a motion to recommend to the full board by President Gregoritis, seconded by Councilor Eccles. And if you could please call the roll.
Sure. Thank you. Counselor Eccles.
Yes.
Counselor Garapay.
Yes.
President Gregoritis.
Yes.
Counselor Jamaluddin. Counselor McMaster.
Present.
Counselor McNaught.
Yes.
Counselor Migliarelli.
Yes.
Counselor Stewart.
Yes.
Counselor Thomas.
Yes.
Counselor Trementosi.
On mute.
Yes.
Counselor Chair Sinella.
Yes.
So 10 yes, 1 present.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, all of you. I'm looking forward to
Thank
seeing
you.
you again in June.
Thank you.
Superintendent, I'll expel you now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, next order 2020-76, authorizing a bond in the amount of $1,450,000 to replace the Department of Works salt shed. I believe we have our DPW director with us.
Let me make her a panelist right now.
We are still under suspension, so
Elena, can you hear us?
Yeah, I was having trouble unmuting for some reason. But here I am.
So we can see your initials. There we are. Perfect. Thank you.
You can see me now? Okay. Okay.
floor is yours.
Okay. So I apologize for the late delivery on the memo that was sent out last night to the council. I had thought that some of this information was provided to you previously when the order was first sent in. So I just found out from Kristen yesterday. I asked her, what does the council have already? And she sent me the information that was sent previously, and I realized it was just this 2-page memo from before. So I'm sorry that we got the information out late, but hopefully everybody had a chance to take a look. So I'll just go through briefly what was submitted in that memo yesterday. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. So as you can see from the pictures that went along with the memo, we have a salt shed that was built in the 1970s. It is beyond its useful life. It's a hazard in its present condition. We've had metal roof panels blowing off. We have trusses in the framing breaking routinely, needing to be sistered up or replaced. We have siding that is warped and damaged and corroding. We have foundation supports that are not really even held together in their original configuration anymore. So it's a building that's in desperate need of attention. We've done enough Band-Aid repairs over the years. We can't do that anymore. Even during the windstorm we had a couple weeks ago, one of the doctors in the office building next door sent us a video of roof panels flapping up in the air that he thought were gonna blow off the roof. And then the next day we had to send somebody out to nail down some 2x4s to hold those down for the moment. So that's the condition that the salt shed is in right now. The Capital Improvement Planning Committee identified this as a high priority item. It was in priority group A, which was the highest grouping, and was considered an urgent need. So Rick Stinson had gone to Weston and Sampson Engineers. They are one of several design firms who can do this type of work, and asked them for a cost estimate. And they came in and took a look at our existing salt shed, measured it up, looked at the site, and they gave us a planning level construction cost estimate of 1.331 million. And then Rick had added onto that some additional contingency for things like soil conditions. We really don't know what we might find. We suspect that what we might find is not good at the city yard, given all the historical uses on that site. So, so he had bumped that up to the 1.45 million that you see before you. The first step in this process is to procure the services of a design engineer who would perform the final design, plans and specifications so that we could then put the project out to bid to get a construction contractor. The one thing that wasn't done in the process to date is to do a full analysis of the types of salt sheds that are out there, what we think makes the most sense for Melrose for its longevity, its cost benefit for, its materials of construction. There are a lot of decisions that would be made up front. The cost estimate that's been obtained is based on what the town of Raynham had done, that Weston and Sampson had designed, based on actual bid prices. I did find, in just looking around online, a range of different types of projects for other Massachusetts communities, ranging from about 700,000 to about 2.3 million. So I would consider the 1.45 million for this particular project to be the outside cost estimate. And once we procure the services of a design engineer and then get through the final design, we would obtain a a bid-ready construction cost estimate from the design engineer, which would be a much more detailed cost estimate based on the actual materials of construction and plans and specs for the particular job. And that would be a much better number, much more refined number than what we're working with now. But Patrick can speak to this more, Patrick Della Russo,
Yes.
but we, the number that we have right now allows us to move forward to procure those design services to get the project underway. We would really like to see this built before next winter, if at all possible. But before any actual borrowing took place, the number would be refined to reflect the actual construction costs.
And again, if I may interject here kindly, in that vein, councilors, in the event that the project's cost comes in at, let's say, 1.3 million rather than 1,450,000, we would seek the council's authority to rescind the higher number and borrow the lower number only. It's something that we've done historically. When those situations occur, we will seek to rescind that. So just because the authorization is 1,450,000 does not mean that you're committed, i.e. if the project comes in less, to spending that money. That is not the case. You also would have the option, or the city with the council is the option, to consider using any any funds that were applicable here that you didn't need for the salt shed for a like purpose for the same duration of time. So that option is also open. Given the nature of this project, though, that's probably not going to happen. I think everything I've been made aware of is that this is going to be quite a large undertaking.
First in queue, we have Councilor Tramitose. Questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Alina, for being here, and Mr. Della Russo for your input as well. As the council representative on the Capital Improvement Committee, I recall this coming up for discussion. I think, if my memory is correct, I think I was the lone dissenter. I did not think that this was very high on at least my list, but it was high on others. So that's why I went into the high category. I'm still of the same mindset. I mean, especially in these times where we're practically into a depression now in finding the resources to support the city. Is this going to be an appropriate use? I know it's a bond, but is this going to be appropriate use of spending? Did we look at any possibility of not a Band-Aid type of repairs, but a more major just repair of the building that would maybe, I've had a suggestion by a contractor who said maybe 200 to 300,000 would fix the trusses and whatever necessary work is there. Is any possibility of that occurring?
I think the issue with the building is that every element of the building has problems. If you look at the pictures, the trusses have problems, the siding and the sheathing underneath the siding has problems. The roofing has major problems. The sheathing underneath the roofing most likely has major problems as well, because the metal roofing has peeled up so many times that it's definitely been exposed to the elements over the years. Even if you look at the pictures of the inside of the salt shed, the walls are completely corroded. So I'm just not sure, other than maybe the foundation, I'm not really sure what is salvageable in that building.
All right, let me propose another suggestion. This is a building that houses the salt used in the streets, correct?
Yes.
All right, and this is my proposal. Knock the thing down. Just take it down to the foundation and use tarps and commercial tires to hold it down. That you can see it in Chelsea and you see it in other towns as well. It may not be as aesthetically appealing to the site, but I think it might be something that we can do for at least for the time being, for the next couple of years, until we get a better handle on the city finances. That's my suggestion.
So I don't think that meets Mass DEP requirements for stormwater runoff. So I'm not really certain. I was having this discussion earlier with some folks. I'm not certain how Chelsea gets away with that per se, but especially where we are immediately adjacent to a water resource area. I have no idea how a community can have something that's that exposed, even with tarps on it, that's that exposed, that has runoff of salt-laden water into an adjacent water body. I don't think that would ever pass muster with Mass DEP.
I think the public works employees and the people there will find a way to make that runoff less of a problem. So it's my thought. I'll let others, members on the council consider, but I'm inclined not to vote in approval of this bond issue.
Okay. As an aside on that, we are required by the end of June to submit our stormwater pollution prevention plan to meet our new NIPD's permit with the EPA and the DEP. To that site, we have two sites where we're required to submit these plans. One is the city yard and the other is the garage at the cemetery. And so we would need to explain in that document too how we're meeting all the EPA stormwater standards. And I don't think it's at all feasible with an open salt storage.
Keep the foundation in place and the tops on top of the foundation on top of the salt within the foundation. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garape? You're on mute. Fine.
I'm good now. Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Patrick, for being here.
Thank you.
Looking at the report that was sent out this morning, or that we saw this morning, the potential design of the salt shed was submitted by the interim DPW director. Would you say that this is your vision of the project, or would you totally have done a different scope project? Sampson and Weston and Sampson, it looks like they were tasked to just come up with an estimate in kind, replacing the same structure. Would that be your vision of what this salt shed would look like? I mean, I think over the last 50 years, things have changed, but I'm sure salt sheds designs, the structure of the city yard.
I have a very open mind as to what the structure should look like. I did send in the memo at the end some information I had found that the town of Burlington had pulled together of some pictures of different salt sheds. Those seem to be all fairly similar in design, and those are all Massachusetts communities. But I'm also familiar with the prefab sort of canopy structures that I've seen used successfully by Mass DOT. You see them on the side of the highway. I think that if it's good enough for them, it might be good enough for us. So I definitely think there's an opportunity here, and that's where the design engineer comes into play, is that we need to hire somebody who has done a range of different types of salt sheds, who can show us what those options are and what they cost and what their lifetime is, their lifespan. And then we can make a more educated decision as to what should go on that site. I'm definitely not bound to what Weston and Sampson had done in Raynham as the, something that's already been selected. I don't feel that way at all.
Yeah, because doing some research over the last few days, the Mass DOT, DCR, and other state highway systems seem to be going with the galvanized steel structures with tarps. And it seems like they're more, according to what I've read, they're more economical, and the lifespan of them are pretty good. I mean, you're not going to get 50 years out of it, I'm assuming, but today I spoke with the Deputy Commissioner of Operations at the DCR, and in that conversation, he told me the last 4 salt sheds that they built, and one in Revere, one in Brighton, one in Cambridge, and the other one was in Nahat by the beach. And they're all going with movable, multi-purpose sheds. And not knowing how our city yard is going to transform, maybe change over the next few years. We've got a building next door to it that is in dire need of repair. I question whether $1.4 million or $1.45 million is the right use of money. Would it make more sense to really look hard at that option of a potential steel post beam tarp that may be removable if down the road the design of the city yard changes, that we have something that we can move to another area in the city. I really would like to see that option, and it was interesting to see or listen to that individual to talk about the direction in which the DCR is going. I also was on the DOT Mass DOT website, and they have under their Mass Highway salt storage practice, they have a program to assist municipalities with construction of salt sheds. And of the 351 communities in Massachusetts, 201 of the municipalities, it says right on the website, have used state funds for salt storage. I know Mr. Stinson is the one who prepared this and submitted it. Do you know if they ever looked at taking advantage of that program and that funding?
So is that separate from Chapter 90 funding?
Yes, from my understanding, it is. It's on the state website under their salt storage practices. And I know also the DCR, they had asked the DCR, and that's something that they've worked with them.
Okay, I do know that a lot of communities do take advantage of Chapter 90 state funds to help fund their salt sheds. Which we don't have the capacity to do because we're already overtaxed on what we want to do with our Chapter 90 funds. But I'm not aware of this other funding source. So if you want to send information along, I'd be happy to take a look at it.
Yeah, it's right on their website. They'll be more than happy to. But I think not knowing where we're going to be next year with the state and state programs, I'd like to see if there's an opportunity to take advantage of some design work or even funding. With going back to if we have to remove the foundation or demolish the shed and remove the foundation, sounds like we're going to have to do something, at least demolish the shed or take it down. What's the concerns with the testing? Should we do an initial boring test on the soil before we start the project to really understand what we're getting ourselves into? Because my understanding is if we take down the foundation, are we now subject to new zoning laws? Are we close to it's very close to the 50 Tremont property? Could that pose a problem? And what is the financial? We don't know the financial, but the financial impact could be extremely high if there's some major cleanup there.
Yeah, so if we are proposing to pour a new foundation, then soil borings would typically be part of the design phase. So absolutely, if the design consultant is ultimately recommending an option that involves a new foundation, then we would definitely do new soil borings. Because of contamination, also because of just peat and other soil conditions that being that close to a waterway, we might encounter that we definitely need to be aware of. We would absolutely try to do the project within existing zoning. I don't think it's the type of project that we would want to go before the ZBA to try to get approval for, any setback variances or anything. So I believe the side yard is 7.5 or 10 feet. I don't think it's anything too egregious. So I think we should be able to meet the side yard setback requirement. I could have that number wrong, but it's not something that we shouldn't be able to meet. But certainly if we do get into soil contamination issues, we would have to think very hard about what we want to do about that, because if we're removing soils and hauling them off site, then there are definitely requirements as to where we can haul those to and it can be costly to dispose of them if they're oil-laden soils. We did do some work right outside the city yard and coming into the city yard with a water service and a fire service in, I believe, 2016. And we did encounter some soil issues there that were, we went through the whole process with DEP to have everything analyzed and certified. And we did have to do groundwater monitoring at any sensitive receptors, which was really across the street before you reach the park. And we found that all of our groundwater sampling met all of their requirements. So we didn't need to actually remove anything or remediate anything. We just had to file some paperwork saying, just acknowledging that there were soils on the site that had oil and that it was fairly contained. So we don't know what we would find there, but given the past uses of that site, it's always been a fairly industrial use of that site. You know, I would imagine that we definitely have to be thinking along those lines.
Do you think that the number that Mr. Stenson included in the additional monies, is that enough to cover it? I mean, the bid was 1.3 and he came in at 1.45. Is that
Yeah,
enough to cover the removal of all that soil?
I think it's enough to cover it if we're faced with the same conditions that we found out front of the city yard. If we find something more hazardous, something different than just petroleum products, or something that had traveled further for some reason, then I'm really not sure. I mean, that's when you get into a lot of uncertainties, but the soil borings would identify that up front, so we would know what we're dealing with. And if it was a situation where reusing the existing foundation could mitigate and avoid those costs, I'm sure that during the design phase, we would be taking that into consideration and not doing anything that disturbed those soils so that we could just leave them in place.
With that building, the current building built in the 1970s, if we were to have to break down the foundation, would we run into any issues with the environmental protection being that close to El Pond now? Would there be new rules, new laws that we would have to abide by if the distance changed?
It would be 100-foot buffer zone from the pond, and I think we'll probably beyond that. And then 100.
Even the river, the creek there that comes through by the pond.
Yeah, so I was gonna say it's 100 feet from the inlet as well, because that would count as probably a perennial stream. But the covered portion of it doesn't count as a jurisdictional area, so it would be across the street where the stream daylights into the inlet of the pond. That would probably be our closest point. And if we were within 100 feet, we would just have to file a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. We would still be able to do the work. Their no disturb zone is only 25 feet. Where it is a pre-existing use and it's not a vegetated site, it's a paved, asphalt area. I don't think there would be any concerns there with the Concom, but we might have to go before them just to get a permit.
Okay. You feel that the building right now is safe to be used? Has it been repaired enough that people can get in and out of it, or do you think it's something that needs to be down very, very soon?
I felt unsafe being in that building, even taking pictures. And I think given the operation of trucks in and out of that building and the potential for something to hit one of those supports, the picture on the second last page of pictures that I sent, that shows the sonotube with the building support that is offset from the bolt that's supposed to be holding it in place, and then you see the framing member that's supposed to connect into that support is not attached at all. You see two screws or nails that are just not attached to anything. That is immediately at the entrance to the building, and all it would take is a loader or a dump truck that salt is being loaded into, backing into that support. And as soon as that goes off that support there, that whole section of the building could come down. There are so many things in that building that are in that that state. And then on top of that, the safety of both the adjacent properties and the people working in the yard when that roofing comes flying off. Those are giant metal sheets. I personally think it's a disaster waiting to happen, and that we need to address it as quickly as possible.
So to Councilor Tramatosi's point, what would be the cost just to demo that so we can make sure that everyone's around there safe and that doesn't happen? I mean, what would be the cost to just demo it?
Well, I think Weston and Sampson had demo as a line item in the.
It was 25,000.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering I don't know if would that be the same, or is that 25,000 based on the scope of the whole project? Or is that if you had someone else just come in and demo it?
It seems a little low for demo and disposal. It does seem a little low. I know when we demoed the building at Kimball Court, when we put in the new parking lot,
Yep.
That was maybe, if I remember correctly, maybe a $15,000 project. And then you never know with buildings built in the 70s if there's going to be something that requires special disposal. It could be some, mastic that was used under the roof sheathing that has asbestos in it, or you just don't know what you're going to find with demo and disposal. So I think that's a little on the low side, but probably for under 50,000, we could get it out of there. But then, can we put up something that is compliant with modern regulations in the interim before we build something? I'm not certain.
I personally conceptually struggle with the idea that we're asked to approve an authorization, in this case, 1.45 million for a salt shed that we're going to be bonding, and that's not the actual amount. It's like giving my son $500 and send him to Dick's and say, bring me back the change, and it's just a totally different world than from what I'm used to working in, to be perfectly honest with you. And I conceptually struggle with that. What would
Counselor, just a reminder, we're way past the 5-minute rule.
Yeah, I got one more question, and then I can get back. I understand we have an appropriation here that we're looking to do, and it may not come up to 1.45. Why couldn't we just appropriate what we think the dollar amount is for the design phase of this, and then go back and do the construction? At least that way we'll know what we're dealing with beforehand. We'll know more of an accurate count. We'll know what your vision is of what you think the building should look like. But if we appropriate and change the appropriation to the dollar amount for the design phase, you can go out and get a contractor and then come back. At least we'll have more information on what we're really looking for. Whether it's a temporary shed, whether you think the permanent permanent wood trussel shed is the way to go. That would be, that's kind of how I would like to see it. I'd like to take baby steps on this. But the way it is now, I will not support this order.
Patrick, do you have any thoughts about a vote to approve the design funding first?
I guess a couple of things. One is conceptually, it's not like you're appropriating 1,450,000. You're authorizing that limit. We typically work with the premise that we are going to go out and seek the best price, obviously, for the project. We also know internally we have to set limitations, and so therefore we know the limitation on this project, i.e., would be that 1.4 million. It provides us a sense of scope, and also I think what we try to do at all times, I think it's been very successful with it. We do not want to come back to the council looking for additional funds. One of the things that is concerning is the imminent issues relative to the actual shed. it appears that the risk to public safety is far greater than perhaps anyone wants it. I am not an engineer. I can't opine more than that. I would suggest that if the council wishes to do something different, that perhaps we're given an opportunity to reconvene and reconsider what proposal or suggestions we would make in that vein. But I don't think we can do it, and I know I can't do it off the cuff tonight and just make a recommendation to do, a certain dollar threshold or whatever the case may be. I mean, this is a significant issue, and that's why I don't want to discount it. It ranked top priority in the capital improvement program. We're talking about a building that is 50 years old. At some point, regardless of what option is chosen, action, in my opinion, has got to be taken or basically put the building off limits. I don't know what else I could add to that, but that's my general comments.
Vice Chair Migarelli, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Sanella. Thank you, Elena. Just have a question about, do you have a sense of whether any parts of this project, either the design or potentially the construction, would be impacted by the situation that we're going on now? Like, are there delays in, engineering firms doing this design work? Just any kind of those impacts on the planning for the project that you anticipate?
So fortunately, engineering firms have already been very well set up for remote work. So most of the engineering firms that I know and that we work with have pretty much continued along seamlessly, and are just conducting all their meetings from home. And, they were set up for that to begin with. I think they have a lot of people who work remotely already, even before this. In terms of construction, I could see if we were ordering some sort of prefab structure. I'm not sure if there would be delays on lead times. I don't know if there are delays on lead times on certain structural members for, custom ordered beams or the like, in a structure like this, because it is all very, it's very specific because you don't have structural supports in the center because you need the whole filled with salt. So there could be some custom orders on certain structural members, but I would think that those types of companies are still continuing on. I know that the larger construction industries, at least in Massachusetts, other than Boston, who maybe is still getting away with a bit of a construction moratorium, the governor's order has required that construction continue. So I would imagine there's still a lot of projects going on, which would mean that those manufacturers are still manufacturing those parts.
Thank you. You've spoken a bit about the public safety impacts of keeping the building the way it is. What about environmental impacts? Also, I took a look at, thank you, Councilor Garapay, for pointing out the Mass Highway Department site, and it seems like on there that it says storage under a roof is part of the, components of an environmentally friendly salt storage facility. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more in detail about the status of the building now, impacts on the environment, what delaying the project might be, or if we made different changes to it, like the tarp suggestion that Councilor Tremontosi had. If you could walk us through that.
So I don't believe there are any major environmental concerns with the building as it is now. My recollection, and I'll look at the pictures too, but I believe the foundation walls come up high enough that there really wouldn't be, it's a little hard to tell, but I don't believe that there would be any runoff. Even if there were roof leaks and there was water coming into the building, I don't think that there'd be anything substantial running off to the exterior of the building. It is something to consider when we look at the design of a future building, whether we want to have an overhead door to ensure that there isn't any material potentially traveling out of the building. I would say that the environmental impacts of any runoff that would be coming from the little bit of water that could get in then getting out probably pales in comparison to the impact of putting salt down on the roads that runs off to the sides of the roads. So I don't really have any concerns there. I think my concerns are more safety related and just, you know, this is a building that is just so far beyond its useful life. If you had something that looked like any one component of this building on your own property, I don't think you would be still looking at it today.
Thank you. I just have one question for Patrick. I know that, while I can appreciate that this is, and thank you, Elena, appreciate that this is obviously like a critical problem, project. I think that given the situation we're in, and we have to be extremely mindful of our expenditures and appropriations during this fiscal crisis. Could you just sort of explain, Patrick, to the public, just kind of walk through the impact of this bond on our overall city budget, how it will impact, how it will not impact it, just to kind of walk through for the benefit of the public, that, what this would look like on our budget.
I'd be happy to. First and foremost, the impact for this shed would not occur until fiscal year 22. And to the extent it'd be an amount of approximately $46,000 at that time, as we'd be doing temporary borrowing. Having said that, I want to back up a little bit on the debt program itself. And I'm not sure how many people are that familiar with it, but we have a 30-year debt program in place already. It controls the amount of expenditures of debt service every year, which means it identifies and limits the amount that we can have on our operating budget dedicated to debt service, so that amount cannot exceed 5% in any given year, so that 95% of our operating budget is dedicated to city and school services, and the remaining 5% or less is dedicated toward investments in the community, such as this project here. That is by design, and the project carries itself right out to the full 30 years, and at no time does the limit of 5% is ever exceeded, and it hasn't been since myself and Ar Flavin and Peter Frazier from First Southwest at that time put this program in place. So I don't want anyone to think for one moment that by voting this, we're putting at risk the city's budget or revenue and expense components. That's not the case whatsoever. In fact, next year's debt for fiscal 21 coming up is already almost $220,000 less than fiscal 20's debt. So the year that we're seeing this turmoil in the economy, which we've seen before, 2008, 9, 10, we've been there, we've done that, does not rise to the occasion that all of a sudden we have to stop investing in the community. That's not the case at all. We specifically have designed the program so that doesn't happen, so that we can continue to make these kinds of investments, particularly where there's public safety concerns and the like with these, that we're able to do that. And I've said it before, you always want to be able to address those types of needs as they surface and not be limited. Because we've already set up a limitation as to how much debt service we can absorb in any given year, we've already taken that into account. And in fact, 78% of our debt is paid off within 10 years, 78%. So we're way ahead of the curve on that. And so there should be no reason on a financing basis why this would not fit into the model, because it fits perfectly. And I have no reservation whatsoever of approving this project, given the economics that we see ahead of us, because by design, we've insulated ourselves and we have not overextended. And some communities have, but we have not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Can I chime in? Hi, this is Art Flavin. Can I chime in?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. That was great. On the debt side, the 2022 hit, the way it looks now, I mean, that's it, would be $47,000 in 2022. We probably wouldn't borrow it till May 2021, which will cut that in half. So that amount goes down to like 23,000 and whatever. And then the first real hit isn't until 2023 after we bond it, and these are conservative numbers. That year will be 83,375. We're looking at existing debt in 2022 of being almost $450,000 less than we have today. I think this is a big project. Nobody's asked the question, what's the consequence of not having a salt shed? What happens when we don't have any salt and we're in the middle of a winter and we're not able to deal with that? We can certainly afford it. It's in the CIP. It's been voted by a number of department heads and the CIP committee that this is an important project. This is a long-term solution to a problem that exists right now today and is quite frankly dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
Councilor Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Treasurer Della Russo and to Mr. Flavin for being here and providing insight and the financial impact on things. And I want to thank Director Proakesalis from the DPW for being here and being so informative. The salt shed design that we've got, that was a $1.4 million estimate, that is for one specific design, as you said earlier tonight. We'll have the opportunity through the RFQ process to get at least 3 bids on this project so we can see different types of options, styles, different pricing options. As you noted in the report, and I did some homework on myself earlier today, the cost between $700,000, I think that was a Wareham salt shed down the Cape, and then the $2 million plus was in Needham. Again, these are varying styles. Hopefully we can come in somewhere in the middle of these costs. As you said earlier, Mass Highway and the Department of Transportation have canopy styles that you might see on the side of the road on the Mass Pike. We can actually, or you can actually gear the request for quote based on the specifics of the design you want to see. We're not beholden to that one style and design for the $1.4 million option. Hopefully, the difference, once we get the specifications on the design that Melrose wants, hopefully we can get a better cost and better, effective pricing options for this. I did have a question about the memo that we received last night. Is that going to be posted on the DPW website so the Melrose community can see the actual amount of decay and damage to the current salt shed?
It was posted on IQM2, so as part of the meeting materials, so it is available to anyone from the public who'd like to see it. If you think it would be beneficial to post it somewhere else on the website, I'm sure we can find a place for it.
Yeah, and it just, looking at the pictures, it's telling, obviously this does need to be replaced, and seeing, it was one of the highest classifications on the capital improvement plan, that speaks to the need of it being replaced as well. I did have to ask though, if this is kept in appropriations for another week or two so we can process the data we're receiving tonight, will the city still have time to schedule replacement in the calendar year for 2020?
I think we're cutting it very close as it is. I would like to, as soon as we get authorization, I would like to solicit the request for qualifications from the design firms so that we can pick somebody, do that evaluation of the different types of salt sheds, pick what we want, get it designed, get it out to bid. It's all the idea of doing this prior to next winter is already extremely tight. But so I would love to have some decision tonight so that we just know what our marching orders are and we can move forward.
All right, and so you are keeping all options open for the RFQ process. Whether it's a canopy design that Mass DOT prefers, away from this specific design from the consulting firm that gave the $1.4 million.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the order is that first we put out an RFQ for a designer, and in that RFQ, we request as the first task that the designer provide us an evaluation of different types of salt sheds once they see our site. We pick the designer that we like the best. We're still not locked into a particular type of salt shed at that point. We're locked into who we think brings the best ideas to the project. In my mind, the best ideas are both someone who's done this before and someone who is willing to look at the wide array of styles, because I had mentioned in a conversation with you earlier today, I worked on a project at a wastewater treatment plant where they needed an enclosure for a very sophisticated set of equipment, and they were able to do one of these prefab canopies. It's been at least 10 years. I've been out to that site in my prior job multiple times, and that was a terrific solution on that site and something you could absolutely use also as a canopy for a salt shed. So I just think there are options out there that need to be explored. And we need a designer to actually tell us what is the cost difference and what is the difference in useful life, so that we know the full picture. And that's something that we don't have the knowledge in-house. So that would be the first step, is bringing on a designer who has that array of knowledge and then having them help us decide what is the best solution. And then they design that solution, then they put it out, that specific solution, out to bid for contractors.
Okay, and just the last thing, just to reiterate, we're not spending $1.4 million right now. You know, this bond will not start until the ribbon is cut after construction. We'll know the exact final costs before the bond is put into place,
Correct.
which could be well under 1.4.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilor McMaster?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Parakasalis. I'd like to welcome you to the virtual chamber for the first time as DPW Director.
Thank you.
Also would like to acknowledge you for the very comprehensive memo that you provided. Yeah, that type of memo, I think, is a model memo. It's what should be expected, and it's the type of information that allows us to, properly vet requests when they come before us. So I want to thank you for that and the effort you put into it, and for always being so prepared when you come before us.
Thank you.
The one question I had relative to the memo is, it talks about the need. I think you made a compelling case for why we need to do something, and I think a compelling case for replacing it as opposed to repairing it. What I think I'm conflicted over is related to what Councilor Garape had inquired about, and that is what may be some other options. And I know you mentioned that the building itself has various problems. It's in complete disrepair, and I'm moved by the public safety concern as it relates to people who live, close by, and certainly to our employees. I just can't help but wonder if we might be moving, and I'm also sensitive to the timing here. Like you said, these projects take time from start to finish, from planning to putting a shovel in the ground. But if it would be prudent for us to perhaps have an engineer evaluate, an independent engineer evaluate some of the potential other options, and then, and I think Mr. Della Russo referenced, if there were an additional date, there'd be some more information that we could have options and weigh the pros and cons of those options, and then be able to compare this request based on its merits with other options in front of us. So I can't help but think that maybe a more prudent at this time would be funding an evaluation to have some additional information, and that's just a thought. But I'm conflicted. The one question I have is for Mr. Della Russo, and that question is about free cash. And Mr. Del Russo, you're always so eloquent in your explanation of when we use free cash, and you always make it clear that it's for one-time uses. And it would seem to me that this may be an appropriate use for free cash, perhaps were it not for the uncertainty right now that we face in this economic climate. And I'm just wondering, is there any reason or other reasons why we may not be looking to fund a project like this at this time with free cash?
If I may, through the chair of the council, that's a great question, Councilor. Great question. I did prepare a memo that I believe is in your possession. It's dated on March 5th of 2020. And it talks about phase 1 and phase 2 capital project funding considerations. I'm not sure if you have it in front of you, but I'll go through the rationale as to why the decision was made to bond this versus using free cash, because it's a topic that comes up often. And I just want to begin with the fact that typically, due to the issuance cost for a bond and what's involved in bonding, we look not to bond anything less than $1 million. Typically, that's the threshold. If it's less than $1 million, then we typically use free cash or other available funds to address it. You wouldn't, for example, bond. If you look at that memo in front of you, if you look under phase 1, it's called projects pay-as-you-go financing, and that always is a preferred way of doing financing. And you see some of the items would be the Central Fire Station headquarters for $100,000, City Hall generator design $105,000, and it goes on and on. Frontline fire apparatus for the pumper, $519,000, school security $300,000, etc. Those items would not be. We would not be able to fund those items that are not large capital items, as this building, this structure, because we would have absorbed all the free cash in this one particular item, this project, and these other needs would not have been able to be met, Councilor. Number one. Number two, we always look to match the duration, the note, with the longevity of the building. This building, we're hoping will last 25 to 30 years. That typically cries out for bonding. And that fits into that category for us. It's a long-term investment. It's going to be utilized, and the benefits will be realized year after year after year down the road. But it is not something we would entertain for free cash. It's part of the capital program. We do have, as you can see, a number of items in capital in nature, but we also have a host of items that are capital, but don't come anywhere near that cost. So we don't ever want to be unable, for example, to do public safety vehicles, police vehicles, fire vehicles, library elevator, for example. That's another item that was about $50,000. A capital item, and typically capital is $25,000 and over is how we qualify it. So I mean, we take in context the big picture, and this salt shed is one of many projects. It happens because of its nature to provide for bonding in our model, and it can be satisfied quite readily. And where again, those other items would not be, we would not entertain bonding them, but there's still needs that we have to have. So it's a sense of balancing, so we can do both. We want to do pay-as-you-go financing for these items that I've indicated on page 1 of my memorandum. And then obviously page 2, the longer term, which we just did the ladder truck, for example. So it's an excellent question. And it's one that it's really, comes down to what is the best practice, and that always has been the best practice.
Thank you, Mr. Del Russo. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Just a brief moment. Kristen, do we have just a recording check right now?
We're at 1 hour, 34 minutes. The recording is working. We're fine. Thank you.
Counselor Eccles?
Thank you, Chairman Snella. Councilor Thomas asked my question mostly, but I would like to just provide one point of clarity about the tight timeline given the public safety issue. So given if we waited in committee for a report on the potential state financing for maybe a week or two, but not much longer given the tight timeline, can you kind of talk to us about like what you would like to see as the last time to get this approved for it to be done for next winter? Because personally, given the public safety threat, it seems like there should be a solution before next winter.
So I personally think we're already eating into the time that allows us to get this done by next winter. And also if we were to go out to procure a design engineer to just do an evaluation and to not do final design, and then we had to then procure somebody to do the final design after that, that adds about 2 months to the project, because you'd have to go through that whole advertisement and procurement and selection process again. So at the very least, I feel that we need to be in a position to jump right into procuring a team that's going to evaluate and then design whatever we pick all at once, in order to have a design complete by sometime in the fall, to put that out to bid for construction and have the construction start in the fall in advance of the winter season. I don't think there's any time to lose, and I'm not just saying that to try to move things forward. I really think we're already, having worked in an engineering design firm for 9 years, we are extremely tight for anyone to design this and get it out to bid in time for construction to occur.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing essentially is passage as is tonight or next week at the latest is the last that would make it possible for next winter.
I guess the semantics there, passage of design funding, absolutely for sure, ASAP. Passage as is my preference for sure, because I think, while it is an upper limit number, I do think that the council should feel confidence in the DPW and the engineering team within the DPW to make a good decision, to make sound decisions budget-wise, and to select a salt shed that makes the most sense for the city. And I hope we're a little more responsible than Johnny going down to Dick's with $500. To Councilor Garapay's analogy, we're not going to spend $499 because Dad gave us $500. We're going to spend what makes the most economical sense for the city. So, I would hope that there's a certain level of trust there. And so I would prefer to just have the upper limit approved, and then with the knowledge that we hope to come back with a lower number, and that would be our goal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Jamaluddin.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming and for the really well-detailed information and report that you provided to us. We really appreciate that. I think everyone agree how much is critical at this point to replace this shed. However, from now till the time that they're able to deliver the new shed, we have the current shed open. Any kind of precautions or preparation for safety hazard?
So the great thing is that we don't need to use it right now, so we really don't have any reason for anyone to be inside of it. The salt is there for next winter. We shouldn't have to use any salt between now and next winter. So the interior concerns with, any sort of collapse or falling structural members or anything should be not a concern for worker safety. The exterior issues, the repair that we did on the roof the other day, which was just a real Band-Aid, was putting 2x4s along the edge of the roof, all along that side of the salt shed where it was peeling up during the windstorm, and just nailing those down to hold down the metal roof sheathing, or excuse me, the sheets. So I think we've addressed the immediate concerns for the moment, but it's next winter when we have to start using that salt again that the safety concerns start to present themselves again.
Is the shed not accessible and no one can access it
So
because of the safety hazard?
it is accessible to anyone working within the city yard. It's within our locked gates, so it's not accessible. You know, no one from the public could wander in there. But it is someplace where the employees could go, and we certainly could, you know, put up a Jersey barrier or some caution tape or something just to discourage any employees from being in there. They really don't have any reason presently to be in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Dela Russo and Ms. Farkasalis for being here tonight. I appreciate your input. Just a couple of questions about the bid that you got from Weston and Sampson. How much salt does Raynham use versus Melrose? Is it comparative in terms of size?
So I'm not certain in terms of the actual salt usage, but I do know that the size of that salt shed was comparable. That's why they selected that one to give us the cost estimate for it. I might be able to tell you real quick. I think they had dimensions in their cost estimate, and I think we have dimensions.
I look at Raynham and it's a much larger town. So, but I know it may be more sparse in terms of roadways. So I didn't know if you looked into it.
So that is a 50 by 72 structure. And I'm not sure I can access it quickly enough here, but I did have a document that said the dimensions. All right, let's see. Sorry, I should be able to find this pretty quickly.
Yeah, no worries. While you're doing that, another quick, this may be more of a question on policy. Have we ever considered outsourcing the salting? Is that an option?
In terms of having somebody else store it and we bring it in?
No, it's somebody else salt for us.
Oh, somebody else salt for us.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's really an option. I mean, we do have other contractors who salt for us, but they still get their salt from our salt shed. I don't know of any places where you can just go and buy salt on the fly during the storm. I think you have to, you know, have it stored somewhere. We have an annual contract with 2 different salt vendors, and we lock that pricing in, and then we go and get that salt as needed.
Sure. And there's been a lot of talk about the environmental concerns about salting and how it's oversalted. Personally, I feel as though when salt trucks come by, you know, they will throw salt over my 2.5 to 3 foot hedge onto my lawn. It's everywhere. It covers not just the sidewalks, but into the bushes. It feels like we oversalt. My question, and relative to this, is are we salting too much? Are we considering environmental concerns? And is the building too big for looking forward into the future?
So I know that we have moved to some different salt products that are a little bit more environmentally friendly, and we can put down a little bit less of them because they're supposed to be more efficient. But it's a very detailed process of knowing how to calibrate the salt spreaders and knowing what just the right amount is to put down, knowing how wide open to have the spreader on, different size roads and everything. And there's definitely an art to it. And I haven't been involved in the winter operations here in Melrose in the past, so I haven't really had a chance to dig into exactly how we're doing it. And I know there's actually also some great local training on knowing just how to calibrate the machinery. So it's certainly something that we could look into, whether there are ways to do it better. But that's not something that I've been involved with here thus far. In terms of dimensions, we're looking at approximately 40 by 100, and the Rainham one was 50 by 72. So the building that they were basing the costs on was a little bit bigger for us than it was for Rainham.
36,000 versus 40,000, right? Okay. Yeah, but it really comes back to my question is there, are you actively trying to reduce salt?
So we have been in the past. I know Peter Pietrantonio has a program in place where he has certain goals that he tries to reach with how much salt we're using or not using, and then that also ties back into our stormwater pollution permit with the EPA, that we have to commit that we're doing certain actions to try to minimize our salt use. And each year he and I have discussed that because I'm the one doing the reporting for that permit. And he's always assured me that, yes, we're following this protocol to try to minimize our salt usage. But again, I haven't been on the ground during the storm working on it from that angle. So, I can't really speak to whether we're doing a good job with it, but I think that we are, based on my conversations with Peter.
Sure. And then when it comes to salt delivery, is that something that we have like a contractual relationship with the salt providers, so that if we get low on salt, say in the January, February timeframe, they can restock our shed?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have, for most of these types of supplies and services, we do 3-year contracts. We do a 1-year contract with 2 optional renewal years that lock in the same price for all 3 years. And so we've been using, on this one, we work with a consortium. We lock in a couple different vendors. So we have 2 different vendors who we have under contract. And when we run low, we restock. We look at our budget. We try to stock if we have a good price, and especially if our contract is expiring the next year, we do try to stock up at the end of the winter to be sure that we're locking in the good price salt that we have. So yeah, we're always trying to maintain a stockpile in there. We try not to let it get low.
Sure. And where I'm leading with this is, are you considering changing the dimensions of the shed for all these factors?
So I'm not certain. The cost estimate that I saw was basically based on that Rainham shed, but then I saw a sketch that I didn't include because I don't know how much stock Weston and Sampson put into this in terms of how it relates to the cost. But they had a shed that has a little bit of an L shape to it that they were potentially proposing. I'm not sure that I see the benefit to that. It was to do some additional equipment storage in the back. I don't know that I think that's the most appropriate use of the shed. I'm not sure from a air circulation perspective, how separate you can keep this adjacent space if you're going to store a truck in it. Because salt is a very corrosive material. It creates a corrosive environment. I'm not sure you'd want anything stored in a building that's contiguous with the salt shed. So yeah, when we go out for a design engineer, we would be starting from scratch basically with the exact dimensions, the exact shape, the exact materials of construction. We would be looking for a designer to evaluate all of those things.
Sure. Well, I do appreciate all of the the candor and effort that you put into this in terms of exposing what the details are. Through the chair, my concerns is that there feels like there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered. There has not really been any, from what I've heard, due diligence on what it would take to repair versus, we know we need to repair it, and that's fully, I completely understand that, and I think it's, there's issues with it, but I don't think we've done due diligence in terms of understanding what that would take. We've just thrown some numbers around, but I haven't heard a definitive, we've looked at this. I also, in terms of the potential funding for this kind of work that could be beyond what we need to do, there could be something from the state, as well as the different options that we're looking at. My concerns that I have with this is it feels like there are still a number of questions. And the Wesson and Sampson bid, just based on some of the other information that's come through, it's a median, but I would hope that we're looking to try to maximize the spend that we're going to be putting forth on something like this. So that's just another observation that I had is that I'm not sure how confident that 1.4 million is from, and I know you said that you're going to go and look at this, but is there another estimate that we've seen, or even, I know you're well involved and connected in a lot of the different public works areas. Does this feel right, or is there? I'm asking because I'm concerned that if we put this number out there, then it's kind of a standard.
Can I speak to that?
Yes.
This is Art Flavin, the treasurer.
Go ahead, Art.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things going on here. The 1.45 number, that's the high end. Of course, if it comes in low, we'll borrow less. We did that with those school modulars. We come in, I forget what the numbers were, but it was over 5 million. We came in 700,000 less. Wound up bonding for 700,000 less when the project came to fruition. That's why we kind of go through our program of 2 years of banning with temporary interest to take advantage of the lower rates and or identify the ultimate cost. That will give you time to do that. The other issue is that I'm seeing is the timing of this is that we'll have no salt shed next year, and decision that you make, whenever you make it, there's a 10-day recession period that kicks it out even further. So whatever you decide today, we can't make or spend any money for 10 business days after this. I believe that's the number, but it's in the charter somewhere. So there's a delay on it so that if somebody wants to come back and contest it, they can. 1.45 to me is a wish number. But I mean, if that's what it is, that's what it is. But I believe Elena and DPW and the rest of the city will work to find the best solution for the least amount of money. The bottom line is we need this thing for next winter. And we need to move on it or we're not going to get there. And between myself and Patrick and Elena, we will make sure it's the lowest cost. We'll make sure it's handled the most responsibly. That's what I have to say.
May I have some input to the chair? It's Patrick.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I think all the points are made are obviously all valid and sincere. One of the things that we struggle with at times in this community is that we need to know when to stop, put the stop sign up. And what I mean is that if we, ideally, if it was a salvageable building and we could repair it, No one in this, I don't believe in the world would not agree to that or suggest that that be done. However, we know that any money we put is putting good money after bad. It's just not, it's another Band-Aid. It may be more a costly Band-Aid. And I don't know what you get at the end of the day. You still have an issue that must be addressed, and it must be addressed timely. And even though we may be able to shore it up here and there, that doesn't take care of the problem. It just kicks it down the road. And that's what's happened, unfortunately, I think, my opinion, with this salt shed is because of the situation in the past, we weren't able to address it properly. Now we can, and to turn around and kick it down the road again, I don't think we're doing a service to our investment program. I just don't see it. That's just my thought. Thank you.
Councilor Garrett, do you still have another question?
Thank
Councilor
you,
Smith?
Mr. Chair. I'm done.
Councilor Garrett? Oh, excuse me, for the first time, Councilor McNaught, sorry.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, I do understand the critical nature and the seriousness of having to fix the salt shed. And I'm struggling with it a lot in which way to go with it. And I do understand that time is of the essence, but I'm also reminded of the fact that the shed is 50 years old. And I do feel that we're under a lot of pressure to say we move tonight or we have no salt shed next winter, which I also understand could be a very real reality. But I do wonder if there's another way to do this. And Ms. Proy-Casellas, you had mentioned if you could get design funding tonight. I know your ideal situation is that you get recommended full passage, but if it was just design funding, if maybe that's a route that we should go. I mean, it has to be fixed. The salt shed has to be fixed. Do we need an entirely new one? I don't know. Do I trust the experts and you and DPW and the group that came out and our financial experts online? Yes, I do. But I think we're in a very, very nervous time period. And again, I'm just reminded that the shed is 50 years old. And that's not to say that it needed repairs all those 50 years, but it does put that much more weight on the decision tonight. And I agree with a lot of what most every counselor said that raised concerns. And I think we need a little bit more time to think about the best approach. Thank you.
Councilor Garrett?
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a motion to hold this in committee. I'd like to see if we can come back, next appropriation meeting, whenever it is scheduled. And hopefully, Ms. Proy-Casellas can have maybe a idea on what the design phase cost would be, and we can appropriate that money. But I would make a motion that we hold this in committee, knowing that this is a priority. But my concerns were that not necessarily that we don't need a salt shed, not necessarily that it's not safe. We need to address that. But I want to make sure that all options were vetted, before we make this decision. So I would make a motion that we hold this in committee. Thank you.
There's a second?
Councilor Sinella sorry.
Seconded.
Okay, so motion to hold this in committee by Councilor Garapé, seconded by Councilor McNaught. Ms. Proy-Casellas, would you like to say something?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to note that we do know what the design costs would be. If that's Mr. Garapé indicated that, when we could come back at a time when we know what design costs are, but we do know it's in the range of probably 85 to 100,000.
On discussion on the motion, is there any discussion around this motion? None. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll.
Councilor Eccles Jr.
Hey, I'll vote to hold it in committee. I think that one of the most remarkable things that we heard tonight was the urgency for passing it for next winter. So I'd like to just keep that timeline in mind, and hopefully we'll have enough information come next week or the week after. But I think that seems to be the goal in mind, and I just kind of wanted to read.
Please call the roll.
Counselor Eccles,
Yes.
Counselor Garapay,
Yes.
President Gregoritis,
Yes.
Counselor Jamaluddin,
Yes.
Counselor McMaster,
Yes.
Counselor McNaught,
Yes.
Counselor Migliarelli,
Yes.
Counselor Stewart,
Yes.
Counselor Thomas,
No.
Counselor Trementozzi,
Yes.
and Chair Sanella.
Yes.
10 yes, 1 no.
Okay. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you. Can I just ask for one piece of clarification? Just when we come back to this at a later date, what you're hoping for it to have us provide in addition to what we have tonight, so we can make sure we're getting that information.
Counselor Garapay?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just hoping for clarification on what further information you'd like between now and the later meeting, just so we can make sure that we gather that information.
I'd like a good estimate on, the design phase, so we can, I assume we're gonna have to adjust this appropriation for that dollar amount. So just something in writing with what you feel the design phase cost will be.
Okay,
We can vote on that.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena.
All right, moving on. Next order, 2020-77, and order.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
I would just also like to respond through the chair to Ms. Farkas-Ellis. There was also discussion from Council Garapay regarding the state funding potential, and it would be nice to know if what options there are from that standpoint beyond Chapter 90. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. In order 2020-77, in order to provide motor vehicle excise tax relief, sponsored by Councilors Trementozzi and Councilors McMaster. You guys want to do rock, paper, scissors to see who can speak first on this virtually?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Counselor.
Chairman. Yes, just as background for my colleagues, this is an order that Councilor Trementozzi and I began working on in mid-March. Filed it on March 26th. The purpose of it is to provide tax relief to residents who may be struggling to pay their excise tax bill, which was due in March. Where we stand at this point, though, we're not looking to go forward with the order tonight as it's written. And the reason for that is that I think, as many of you know, since filing our order on March 26th, the legislature has passed and the governor has signed a municipal relief legislation. And based on that legislation, we are really prohibited from exceeding the relief that is in the governor's law, or the law that's been signed by the governor. So the way the order is now asks for relief beyond the June 1st deadline and the June 30th date, which would allow for fees and penalties and interest to be waived. So as it stands now, the order is not a legally appropriate order in that we cannot supersede what it is that the governor has ordered. It was an attempt by Councilor Trementozzi and I prior to that to seek relief, but we recognize that we can't go on beyond that. However, there is some statutory discretion that already exists. And that discretion relates to two areas. The first is demand notices and the fees associated with the fee associated with a demand notice. The second is with respect to transmitting delinquent taxpayers' information to the Registry of Motor Vehicles. I know everyone has a copy of our letter that Councilor Tremontosi and I sent to Mayor Broder in response to a letter he sent to us on April 6th, speaking to our order. And I do want to recognize and applaud Mayor Broder for authorizing the maximum relief under the municipal relief legislation that he's authorized to do as mayor. He is aware, and the mayor and I spoke earlier this evening, that Councilor Tremontosi and I do want to assess next steps. And there's really one of two things we can do. We can either pull the order based on further discussions and dialogue with Mayor Broder, which he's indicated he's open to doing. There's also some data that we've requested that the mayor said that he would assist us facilitate getting. And based on that information, we'd be in a better position to figure out how we intend to proceed. Again, whether that's withdrawing the order or filing an amendment that would allow us to proceed on the additional statutory discretion that already inherently exists. So based on that, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion at this time to hold this order in committee.
Councilor Tremontosi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would agree with Councilor McMaster's representations, and I would second that motion, obviously. And there's another reason why I think it's important is because we have another order that's making its way into that was on the one of our original board meetings and sent to appropriations, and that's the real estate tax relief as well. And that's making its way into the Appropriations Committee. And so my thought is that that order, together with the excise tax order, can be handled together, and it makes sense to keep them together. So when the other one gets into the Appropriations Committee, it'll be there with this one. So I would make that motion. But what I'd like to do too is the letter of the mayor dated April 6th and our Councilor McMaster and my letter dated April 20th, and the further letter dated April 29th be attached to this order. I would make that motion. We can, I'll second the motion to keep it in committee, and then further make a motion, assuming council goes along with it, further make the motion to add those.
I believe we have to dispose of the first motion, and then we can get to that. So,
right. So I'll second the motion to hold it in committee.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor to hold this order in committee by Councilor McMaster, seconded by Councilor Tremontosi. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Chairman, is there a point of discussion here? Are we able to?
Sorry, I didn't see any other hands.
Oh, sorry.
Raise your hand. Okay, go ahead.
I am now. Yeah. So I guess going forward, we're talking about the point of clarification is on demand notices. So I'm just curious, if we hold this in committee, I think coming back at the next committee meeting, some information on who this is affecting, how many demand notices do we get? We're just dropping the fee. I just want to know who's being impacted by this in comparison to the rest of,
Through the chair, yes. Thank you very much, Councilor. And that is some of the outstanding data that we've requested, that the mayor indicated tonight that he would be circling back with his staff to provide those answers prior to the next meeting. So you're absolutely right. There are, I believe, 5 questions we had submitted to the administration in conjunction with the letter that we sent back on April 20th. So to give the administration some more time to be respectful of the knowledge and information that exists that it needs to gather, we think it would behoove us to just hold this for now, get that information, and assess how to proceed. So again, through the chair, thank you, Councilor, for raising those questions. And what I would do is certainly forward those questions to Ms. Foote, that she could circulate to councilors, so councilors would at least know the questions that we asked in advance. And what I would do through the chair is encourage any additional, questions through the chair, what I think could be presented on top of the questions that we posed, because I think Councilor Trementozzi and I don't want to suggest that we have all of the, the questions in terms of how they may impact taxpayers. So I think between now and the next meeting, it would give everyone else an opportunity, knowing the questions that Councilor Trementozzi and I asked, to ask additional questions that we perhaps do not address in those that we put forth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Madam Clerk?
Councilor Eccles,
Yes.
Councilor Garapay,
Yes.
President Gregoritis,
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin,
Yes.
Councilor McMaster,
Yes.
Councilor McNaught,
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli,
Yes.
Councilor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilor Thomas,
Yes.
Councilor Trementozzi,
Yes.
Chair Sinella.
Yes.
11 yes.
Okay, for our final
I
order of
think
this evening, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
That's
Chairman. That's right. So
Getting late.
at this time, we're holding it in committee, but I do want to make a motion to add those letters to the order, just so that we have them for next time around when we speak on it.
There's a second motion to add those letters to the order by Councilor Trementozzi, seconded by Councilor McMaster. Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Councilor Garapay,
Yes.
President Gregoritis,
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin. Yes. Okay. Councilor McMaster, Councilor McNaught,
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli,
Yes.
Councilor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilor Thomas,
Yes.
Councilor Trementozzi,
Yes.
Chairman Sinella.
Yes.
11 yes.
Thank you.
Okay, for our final order 2020-64, request for information regarding the previous and forthcoming process for payments in lieu of taxes or annual financial arrangements with Melrose Wakefield Hospital. This was sponsored by Councilor Lipper Garabedian at the time, who's now our state rep. Discussion?
Chairman Sinella,
Yes, President.
considering that Councilor Garabedian is now Representative Garabedian is no longer with the council as the maker of this order, I make a motion to recommend placing this on file.
Seconded.
Okay, we have a motion to place this order on file by President Gregoritis, seconded by Councilor Eccles. On discussion? Seeing none. You call the roll, Madam Clerk?
Councilor Eccles,
Yes.
Councilor Garapay,
Yes.
President Gregoritis,
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin,
Yes.
Councilor McMaster,
Yes.
Councilor McNaught,
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli,
Yes.
Councilor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilor Thomas,
Yes.
Councilor Trementozzi,
Yes.
Chairman Sinella.
Yes.
11 yes.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
By Councilor Thomas, seconded by Councilor McNaught. Madam Clerk, if you would, for the final time this evening.
Councilor Eccles,
Yes.
Councilor Garapay,
Yes.
President Gregoritis,
Yes.
Councilor Jamaluddin,
Yes.
Councilor McMaster,
Yes.
Councilor McNaught,
Yes.
Councilor Migliarelli,
Yes.
Councilor Stewart,
Yes.
Councilor Thomas,
Yes.
Councilor Trementozzi,
Yes.
Chairman Sinella.
Yes.
11 yes.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Be well.